Welcome ladies and gentlemen, my name is Dychronic, yours here on this Destiny 2 video, and today we're going to take a look at my top 10 PvE specials in Destiny 2 Season of the Witch. And of course, as always, I have made a spreadsheet for this video, which can still be found at my Discord, link in the description down below, on the channel #SpreadsheetStocks. And these perks will obviously have the perk recommendations for a lot of the options I've considered, as well as the DPS calculations. And of course, these spreadsheets and these videos are supported by my patrons on Patreon. And unfortunately, I had to pull back on a lot of these spreadsheets, so you haven't seen as many over the last few seasons. If you want to see these return or continue at all, please consider checking out my Patreon, link in the description down below. And if that wasn't enough for you, there are cute animals on the screen right now. Perhaps that will convince you that money it's ethereal. Doesn't mean much. Spreadsheets are forever. Alright, well that's bullshit, but I could use your help. And the last thing I'll say before getting into it is that obviously this is the top 10, so I can only pick about 10 options. There are many other weapons in this game that are great, and you should continue to use, even though they're not on this top 10. Right, so without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. At number 10, we have the Waveframe grenade launchers, things like New Pacific Epitaph, or Harsh Language, or Forbearance, all of which function essentially the same. You fire a grenade launcher shot at the floor, it creates a big wave in front of you, it doesn't do a lot of damage to you, and kills a lot of fodder enemies in the area. And so if you have trouble with fodder enemies, like in the first part of the Crutter raid, these are great options. And we have a bunch of different options, as well as one in both the first and second slot. And with a bit of an asterisk, I just want to say is that these weapons are more like a primary weapon, as they don't do a lot of DPS, they don't have a lot of full ammo damage, they're very much for red bar enemies, which means that your primary, your heavy, or your abilities have to handle majors and bosses in some way. And let me tell you, shooting these at Shriekers are not nearly as effective as you want them to be. Following that at number 9, we have the Izanagi's Burden, which is going to be your big bada-boom cannon of the lot, where you can take all 4 shots in this sniper rifle, turn it into one extremely high damage shot, which is very high burst, allows you to reload behind cover and fire 5 cannons at your enemy. Especially if you have a div bubble, it does really high damage, because it does nearly 6 times multiplier on its crit. And usually you see this the most often in raids in cooperation with, for example, rockets, which have obviously not a lot of shots in them. Especially if you have auto-loading rockets, allows you to use Izanagi's Burden, reload it, swap to an auto-loading rocket, and kind of go back and forth. Or you can use this in Grandmaster Nightfalls, where you set up a div bubble on a champion that's been stunned, and you just burst them down really quickly. However, we don't see this nearly as often because we do have the Supremacy in the game, as well as some other options like heavy machine guns and linear fusion rifles in the heavy slot, which have taken over its use case. And if you want to pick this up, I believe it's at the Exotic Archive fairly cheaply. Up next after that, at number 8, we have the Divinity, which I'm sure you've heard a lot of things about, which I believe comes from something Garden of Salvation or some quest. And its use case is either going to be for overload rounds for the champions in the Grandmaster Nightfalls with Izanagi's Burden, as I mentioned before, or when you have precision weapons in raids, like for example on Irya in Crota. If you want a big div bubble, which creates a huge crit bubble for linear fusion rifles, for Thunderlord and other heavy machine guns, or sniper rifles like Supremacy we'll talk about in a little bit. On top of that, it also gives you a 15% weaken effect, which is about half of Tractor Cannon and Tether, which is a 30%. But again, you get that huge crit bubble, which is incredibly useful for those precision weapons, making them easy, quick, and much higher damage. Most snipers around a 4 times crit. And before you ask, no, I will not carry you to get the Divinity from Garden of Salvation because I hate that raid. Or more specifically, I hate Sherbrain that raid. Frankly, if nobody else has Divinity, I'll use Divinity. I'll be happy to, because I don't want to do that freaking raid. Following that at number 7, we have a weird eclectic group of snipers, which I will consider some of the best snipers in the game. First up, we have the Cloud Strike, which is an exotic sniper rifle with no catalyst, where if you keep getting crits, you create lightning strikes on top of the really high DPS of a 140 RPM sniper. And in general, over the last few seasons, we've seen a lot of buffs to snipers, multiple for damage, and some for reserves on the rapid fire frames, which I believe Cloud Strike counts as a rapid fire frame. Other than that, we also have the Supremacy from the Last Wish raid, which obviously on top of that is also kinetic, and also a kinetic special, meaning that it does 15% more damage than the energy versions, a 140 RPM, meaning very high DPS, and of course the higher reserves like we saw from last season, and incredible perks like Bait and Switch plus Rewind Wounds, or 4 times the Charm plus Rewind Wounds, which means you're essentially not needing to reload while continuing to fire at a target. And if you have that div bubble, ooh, it does a lot of freaking damage for a sniper, which snipers usually do not do high DPS or high full damage. Other than that, we have Praetor's Revenge, which comes from the Vaults of Glass, another kinetic 140 RPM sniper with Frenzy or Rewind Wounds. Or the Succession, which comes from the Deep Stone Crypt raid, which has Firing Line plus Reconstruction. Although it's obviously an aggressive frame, which usually means more full ammo damage and less DPS, still great option. All 4 snipers being some of your best options for long-range stuff. Following that, let's talk about number 6, which are going to be the aggressive frame shotguns. Honestly, I haven't placed aggressive frames this high in a long time, but honestly, they feel amazing. Especially the Regnold or the Imperial Decree that I have, the kinetic shotguns. They do a lot of great stuff, and they work really well with the melee stuff. So firstly, they are all shotguns. Pellet-based shotguns specifically, where the slugs just don't feel worth it to me anymore. Even though I have long range and you can stay out of melee range, shotguns are shotguns, shoot right at the middle of the body. 1.1 times crit just means right in the middle of the body. It's really nice. Secondly, because they're so slow fire rate, they do a lot more damage, and meleeing between shots doesn't really affect their DPS output as much. So things like 1-2 punch, where you fire, get all the pellet hits, and then go for a melee, follow up with some kind of melee bonus you have on your class, is really strong. And something that many people don't know is that the aggressive frame shotguns, when you get a kill with them, they actually fire a little bit faster for a bit of time, which is nice. You can set up stuff with it. And probably most importantly, they have some of the best full ammo damage of all the shotguns in the game, which I usually favor towards because I run out of ammo. If you're looking to pick one up, the Imperial Decree kinetic shotgun you can actually find from the middle table in the helm, I believe the Risen set, from the previous Leviathan set of stuff where you also get those swords. I also recommend the Regnold, which is a world drop, and you can also get it from the Gunsmith, which is obviously really nice. However, coming up at number 5, we have the lightweight shotgun. And honestly, 5 and 6 might be a bit interchangeable, but I often prefer the lightweights for a lot of other scenarios. First of all, as a lightweight, you have much higher RPM, a little bit easier to use if you're new to the game. It has lightweight built into it, meaning you run faster with it, which is great for shotguns. And in general, you have a bit more DPS for a little bit less full ammo damage. On top of that, lots of great versions as well as craftable versions, and a new one this season in the form of Swordbreaker from Courtesan Raid, which can get surrounded, as well as Pugilist and the Cursed Thrall melee-based explosion origin trait. Should be a lot of fun when I get it. You also have Wastelander from the 30th anniversary Xur thing, or Reese Walker from the Iron Banner, or Without Remorse from the Season of the Haunted, which should be in one of the exotic mission pools. Following that at number 4, we have the Arbalist and the Ariana's Vow, which I often consider to be brothers because one's in the kinetic, one's in the energy, and they're both used for anti-barrier because they both have built-in anti-barrier rounds. And while a lot of people have been using these a lot less, mostly because handling champions is so much easier with the subclass verbs, they are still incredible weapons for so many different reasons. First of all, again, both barrier rounds, meaning that Grandmaster Nightfalls, they're kind of solved with these weapons. Secondly, they both have extra damage perks. Arbalest, you break an enemy's shield, which also includes a barrier shield to do more damage with Arbalest. And on Ariana's, you do more headshots and you keep doing more damage. On top of a bunch of other perks, where Arbalest also has Shield Disorient, and Ariana's also has auto-loading with the Catalyst, which, by the way, Ariana's Vow comes from the Exotic Archive. It's very cheap to buy for newcomers, and starting that Catalyst as soon as possible for 400 games is very important. And with that, they also have pretty darn good DPS and full ammo damage. If you consider the fact that they're essentially snipers, and you look at where a lot of the other snipers are for full ammo damage, which is around 400,000 full ammo damage, having twice that amount of full ammo damage in this weapon is nothing to be snuffed at. Even Ariana's has a lot more on top of way more DPS, and frankly, a lot easier to use. And one of the biggest arguments against Arbalest is usually going to be Wish End, which is an exotic bow with anti-barrier intrinsic into it and has that broadhead perk, making it do essentially special ammo level damage in a primary weapon. However, this is a list for special ammo weapons. Wish Ender is great, but it's also a bow. Not a lot of people like using bows. Arbalest and Ariana, a little bit different, are great at what they do, even outside of needing barrier round. Following that at number 3, we have the rapid fire fusion rifle. Things like Riptide, Cartesian Coordinate, No Composure, Likely Suspect, and Iterative Loop are incredibly fun and effective weapons in this game. First of all, and probably most importantly, they have the highest DPS and full ammo damage of any other legendary fusion rifle in the game. I don't know why, because why would you have both? The only thing they're lacking is obviously range, but the faster fire rate makes them easier to use, a lot more piecemeal as well, simpler to newer players, and frankly, just more fun. And even though they have less range, it's usually not a big deal. And they're legendary. They fit in every loadout. And we also have the Riptide in the first slot and a bunch of options in the second slot. I genuinely hope for a new first slot option though, because Riptide has so many perk options and I'm sick of tired trying to get my auto-loading plus chill clip roll. In case you wanted to pick some up, Riptide is from the random Crucible drops. Cartesian, I believe, is World Drop. No Composure is from the Exotic Archive, so that's a great way to get one pretty quickly. Iterative Loop is from Neomuna, and Likely Suspect is from the Witch Queen stuff. Following that at number 2, probably one of the best weapons in the game in general, the Conditional Finality. This thing is so fun and so very effective. If you've never heard of it, it comes from the new Root of Nightmares raid as the final boss drop the raid exotic, which is annoying because you have to get it to drop. And this particular weapon is a shotgun with 2 shots. The first shot is stasis, where if you hit all the pellets, you freeze the target, which counts as slow and shatter damage, which obviously affects overload and unstop champion. And the second shot in the barrel does solar damage. If you hit all the pellets, you ignite the target, which also affects unstop champions, and obviously both of which hit big AoE in the area. And with that, it does the highest DPS of any of the special ammo weapons in the game, and 1.2 million full ammo damage. And to give you an idea of just how amazing that is, here's conditional finality right here, 1.2 million. Aside from Witherhoard and this weird tessellation thing, it is better than almost every other special in the game, in both DPS and full ammo damage. And because it's a shotgun, it's very simple to use and a ton of fun. Really, the only downsides to this is that it's, again, a shotgun, so close proximity. It's a raid exotic, meaning it's very random and very annoying to get. Although it technically doesn't have champion rounds, it technically does affect champions very easily. And I guess kind of as a weird side part is because the first shot stasis and the second is solar, putting mods to affect it is annoying because you have to put both stasis and solar stuff to reload, to do more damage, to holster, and it's kind of annoying. But frankly, even without all that, it's still great. It's so good. And finally, at number 1, we have the Witherhoard, which has been one of my favorite weapons in the game for years at this point, and I still think is one of the best weapons in the game, if not the best PvE special in the game. If you've never heard of it, it's essentially a grenade launcher where you can shoot at the floor, doesn't do a lot of damage to you, creates a puddle on the floor that damages enemies, or direct impact the enemy and it sticks to them and does damage as they walk around. And if they die with it, they drop it to the floor and it creates another pool. Although unfortunately, only one Witherhoard can be affecting one target at a time, so you can't have a team of Witherhoards, it's usually one Witherhoard. And as you saw before, it has the highest total ammo damage for any PvE special in the game, and most PvE heavies in the game too. And probably one of the best parts is that it's one of those fire and forget weapons. You fire at a group of enemies and you go hide behind cover while reloading all your weapons. Or maybe you fire at a group of enemies and you shoot them with your primary or your heavy. Or you're doing DPS to a boss, you fire at the boss and switch to your heavy and do damage with that while it's still taking damage. Still proccing stuff like bait and switch. And frankly, it's just one of those weapons that just makes you feel like on fire. You pull out the weapon, you fire it at an enemy group. If you have the catalyst, you also have autoloading. So you put it in your pocket, you pick out another weapon, fire at them with those weapons, use ability, pull it back out. It has the ammo back in it again, you rinse and repeat. You're just quick, you're fast, you're doing a ton of output, and honestly, you don't even really care about missing because it has 2.1 million damage or 2.5 million damage. And if you are looking to pick one up, I believe it is from the Exotic Archive, and again, pretty cheap. I recommend this is the #1 first choice from the Exotic Archive. As soon as you can, buy this and get the Catalyst started, which again needs 400 games of Crucible or Strikes, which is obviously very long. And it is way better with the Catalyst. You never realize just how much autoloading does for you until you don't have it. And of course, I just want to give a big thank you to my patrons on Patreon. Without their help, this really wouldn't be possible. Specifically, big thank you to Mom Dad, Kipper Shaw, Waffle Prez, Joe Bad, Rob Strayer, James Ostler, Ethan Hodges, Monty Armstrong, Monday, Steve Bachman, Junior Panther, Case Reagan, William Pearson, Benjamin, and Sam Galaxy for their support on Patreon. That's it. Hope you guys did enjoy. My name's Dychronic, and I'll see you guys on the next one.